Hi, this is piano class, Mr. McKnight here. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Baroque era. The first few pieces in a book I have for us, they're called Classics. The first few pieces are from the Baroque era. And there are some characteristics that we have of performer controls that we use. Dynamics, tempo, articulation. There is a certain way of playing Baroque pieces, and we have to think a little bit about the history in that era, and that makes sense. You think the Baroque era went from approximately 1600 to 1750. And in that time, they just had the Renaissance, Enlightenment ideas. These people thought that the world was an orderly world, came from an orderly law-giving creator. We had the rise of modern science, scientific method, and an emphasis on all things having symmetry in the Baroque. From their construction and their architecture, look at Thomas Jefferson's house here in the United States, and it would be an example of Baroque architecture, very orderly, symmetry, square. Everything had to follow convention. How you acted, how you lived, how you courted, how you dated, and it was really different from how we live. But and they had powdered wigs and different colored clothing. But all of that goes into this, their attitude towards music as well. We had what they called motor rhythms. They didn't think that we needed to be upset. So they would have a rhythm pattern like da 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 da, and it would be used over and over in the piece so as to not upset our constitutions. And that's the way they thought, that it needed to be nice and orderly and keep going. Another thing is that they didn't want to disrupt the order, the harmony, with sudden changes of that rhythm pattern or sudden dynamic changes from loud to soft or tempo changes. They thought, we need to keep it steady and have a performance, And then at the very end, you'll hear on the recordings I've even posted online, I've tried to, and this is not one of them, it's just an example, I'll improvise. But if the rhythm pattern was this, the tempo would keep the same until the very end of the piece, the very last beat. The tempo would slow down. So we're expecting pieces to continue the same tempo, continue very similar dynamics. If they were written at all back then, they were written into the music. You have the concerto grosso, where you have a string orchestra, but for dynamics, they would have a smaller group play, and then they have a bigger group play. Less notes on the keyboard, more notes. So they didn't necessarily play loudly. They were just beginning to write forte and piano, and they didn't have a piano, so they couldn't do all the dynamic louds and softs that we can today. So you'll hear very small range of dynamics and what they call tiered dynamics even. This whole little phrase, and think about it, they didn't have a piano, they had a harpsichord. And multiple sets of, with the keys, they would call them manuals, multiple sets of strings. And so one phrase, you might play just one, and then you'd flip a lever, and you'd engage maybe all three sets of strings. And that was your dynamic contrast. And so it was in like stair steps rather than gradual. Dum da 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 dum da da da. It was like dum da da dum da dum da 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 yum ba da 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 dum, because of that instant. It's mechanical. Makes sense. If you have any questions, email me. The first set of pieces that I want you to listen to and analyze are from the Baroque era, and they're all options for a final project. Um, and I expect those performer controls to be built in towards the end.